for the win. Sand Shroud!
Hi guys, it's me, Alexa from Alexa Plays Games. So today I'm excited to share some tips and tricks with you guys for one of my favorite legendary brawlers, Sandy. Sandy was the first legendary I unlocked back when brawl boxes were a thing, and getting a legendary brawler was all about good luck. So when I got Sandy, I did nothing but play him for like 3 months straight. And that's not me being hyperbolic, okay, that's just a fact. But aside from pushing him to 750, I've been neglecting him for a while. Sandy has always been great though, especially for new players, but recently he's been getting a lot of attention because he was given a Hypercharge with a new toy to play with that I also happened to unlock on my mini as well. I swear I wasn't bougie, guys. It was a drop, I swear. I decided to push him to 800 on my main and auto lock him in ranked on my mini while working on this video. So change into something comfy, guys. It's nap time.
Nap time!
This is my all-around build for Sandy, but I experiment with his build depending on the map and mode. I find this build tends to have a lot of success no matter the map though, so if you don't have a lot of spare coins, you might want to go with this first. But don't feel like you have to copy me. There's a lot to consider while putting together his build, so I wanted to introduce it all to you so you can put together a build that works for you and your playstyle. You can't really say either of Sandy's gadgets are trash, just one is clearly better than the other. So let's get the not so great one out of the way first.
Relax!
Sleep Stimulator causes Sandy to fall asleep for 1.5 seconds, and by the time he wakes up, his health is fully restored. I'm not saying this is a bad gadget per se. You could probably find some use out of it. It is nice to have when you need to heal up relatively fast, but just to make sure that if you're using this gadget that you heal up somewhere safe like behind a wall, because for that 1.5 seconds, Sandy is a total sitting duck. Sweet Dreams puts Sandy's enemies to sleep for 1 second. As you can imagine, making your enemies the sitting duck is much more useful in a variety of ways. You can use this gadget for both offense and defense. It can be used to help you inflict damage or take down an enemy or two, but it's also incredibly useful for self-defense, especially when an aggressive and scary brawler comes for you. Also, since Sandy has a piercing attack, yeah, all my favorites do, as you might remember, you can also stun more than one enemy at once. That's great, of course, for charging your super or getting a much needed double kill, but you can also use it to achieve objectives, whether that's stunning your enemies so you can score a goal in Brawl Ball or stunning them so you can get away with the gems and gem grab. This gadget can be used in so many different situations and definitely outshines Sleep Stimulator. Both of Sandy's star powers are useful, but it really depends on your playstyle. If you're more of a healing support specialist, you'll probably prefer Healing Winds. Healing Winds heals Sandy and his teammates while they're inside a sandstorm for 380 HP per second. While this isn't the most popular star power in the world, again, it just depends on your playstyle. If you're more of a support your aggro teammates kind of player, which I'll confess, I am definitely fine with taking on that role when my teammates are more skilled than me, you'll probably find a ton of value using this star power. Healing is always extremely useful no matter the mode, and Sandy's Sandstorm is enough to assert much needed control on open maps like Ring of Fire. But if you like to support your teammates with visibility, especially in grassy maps, or are partial to controllers like me, I'd recommend my preferred star power, Rude Sands. Rude Sands damages enemies within Sandy's Sandstorm for 216 damage per second. You might be asking, how does this support your teammates, Alexa? Much like Janet's gadget, Sandy's Sandstorm covers a wide area, and if your enemies are hiding in the grass within that range, they will be revealed as the star power inflicts damage on them. Because of this, it's especially useful on grassy maps, but it's still useful on open maps for control purposes, which is why the star power is much more suited for a controller build, since that damage tends to freak enemies out and they'll run out of the grass or the area you want to control in order to not sustain damage from the sandstorm. This will allow your teammates to push up and hopefully snag some takedowns in the process. Also, just like Janet's gadget, if your enemies are low on HP and you're out of ammo or not in range, it can help you finish them off, but that's pretty rare. Most of Sandy's gears are pretty standard except for his mythic gear, but as always, I wanted to go through how each gear might benefit Sandy in particular. But let's first get his mythic gear out of the way. If you like your controllers like me, you might like this gear. Exhausting Storm reduces enemies' damage inside a sandstorm by 20%. This mythic gear is pretty controversial since most of the time Sandy Sandstorm forces enemies to retreat out of the area, and they'll very rarely be inside a sandstorm long enough for a lot of players to feel like they're getting any value using it. But seeing as I love Hot Zone and any controller mechanic in general, not to mention I mostly use Sandy in Hot Zone, I find that I get a lot of value out of it when I play him on single zone maps like Ring of Fire and Dueling Beetles. Hot Zone is different from most modes because enemies are kind of forced to try to get to the zone no matter what, which means that this mythic gear can help me deal with those enemies much easier when they're bold enough to stay inside Sandy's Sandstorm to get more zone time, which happens pretty often. But if you don't have the coins to spare, don't feel pressured to get it. He gets a lot of value out of other gears as well. For instance, my first preferred gear is Gadget-Charge, or the +1 gear, because his Sweet Dreams gadget makes for some serious game-changing plays and much needed self-defense, so you can always use an extra gadget. Also, I often recommend using the damage gear for Sandy. Sandy's basic doesn't do a lot of damage. Don't worry, we'll get into that later, but the damage gear can really help him out in a lot of situations when he needs a bit more damage to finish the job. This is why I keep the damage gear in my overall build instead of the mythic gear, because sometimes it can be just so frustrating when enemies get away with just a sliver of health. You might also like the shield gear for Sandy on more open maps. His movement speed is fast, but he often has a hard time closing the gap between him and his enemies. Not to mention, after they released his Hypercharge, he became target number 1 most of the time, since granted, his sandstorms are super annoying. So the survivability the shield provides does come in handy. Frankly, I'm on the fence when it comes to the vision gear. It does come in handy on grassy maps, but he's not really a scout like Jean or Jessie, so I always feel like I just don't get as much value out of it as I do with other brawlers. If you plan on using him primarily on grassy maps, you might think it's a must-have gear, but I think his other gears provide more value since his range just isn't that long. Speaking of grassy maps, the speed gear definitely provides a lot of value for Sandy there. It's often difficult for him to close the gap on open maps, which is why he thrives on grassy maps, and the speed gear, of course, makes that a lot easier as well. I almost always use this gear on maps with a significant amount of grass.
Whoa, chill!
Now, Sandy's Hypercharge is one of the Hypercharges which has completely shifted the meta. As you can see, Sandy was already a good brawler in the A tier, but now because of his Hypercharge, he has made it into the S tier according to Kairos' latest pro tier list. His Hypercharge is undeniably good, most notably the speed boost he gains and gives his teammates who are in his Hypercharge Sandstorm. The silence doesn't really do much since it only lasts for half a second, but the speed paired with the damage and shield with a sandstorm on top of that, yeah, that's enough to make an A tier brawler S tier for sure. I definitely foresee a nerf in his future, but since the current meta has shifted due to speedy brawlers skyrocketing into the S tier, it's no surprise that Sandy made it to the top of the list. I should note though, Sandy only benefits from the speed boost in his Hypercharged Sandstorm after his Hypercharge times out. Sandy's mechanics aren't the hardest in the world to figure out, which is why he's so beginner friendly. If you're just starting to play the game, make him one of the first legendaries to unlock because while there are some tricky aspects to his gameplay, his mechanics aren't difficult to master. He's always considered by players to be a very solid brawler no matter the meta, but there are quite a few things you need to keep in mind while playing him, so let's get into it. Sandy's basic attack is probably the only thing that has kept him out of the S tier until he got his Hypercharge. Honestly, it's fair. Imagine how broken he'd be if he had a good basic attack. That would honestly be scary, I'm not gonna lie. But even so, it can be very frustrating playing him, not because aiming his attack is difficult, just because there's a lot to keep in mind, specifically aiming his shots, his range or lack thereof, and also his lack of DPS. First of all, aiming. You can technically spam auto aim with him. I wouldn't recommend it, but his basic attack is very wide, so it's not like you're gonna miss as long as you're in range. I still recommend at least aiming his first shot because you don't want to get too close to your enemies. Also, his reload is incredibly slow, and when you play a brawler with slow reload, it's always best to aim no matter what because that prevents you from running out of ammo. Then there's range. He doesn't have much range, and if anything, while you're aiming, it actually appears longer than it actually is because it's shaped at an angle, with one side being shorter than the other. So his range can make things very difficult at times because he's often outranged, especially on open maps, so you do need to work on your jukes a little bit in order to get into range. He does have a fast movement speed though, so that helps, but it still takes a bit of practice. Time. And of course, there's damage. His DPS is pretty low, which means getting too close to most brawlers is essentially a death sentence. Keeping a healthy distance away is key, and the best way to do that is to be just close enough to hit your shots, but also far enough away that you can run away if need be. Along with his slow reload, this is another main reason why aiming your shots is pretty crucial. You don't want to be too far away and waste your ammo with such a slow reload speed, but you also don't want to be too close and let a brawler with actually good DPS up close take you out. So finding a way to strike that balance means almost always aiming your first shot at the very least. The good news is his basic pierces through enemies and objects, so the best way to charge up your super is to try and conserve your ammo for when 2 or more enemies group up. It's not always possible though, but it is the best way to charge up your super quickly.
Sandstorm!
Speaking of which, let's talk about his super because it's what makes him such a good brawler. I've heard a few YouTubers say that you really can't go wrong when it comes to placing your sandstorm since it covers such a wide area, but I have to disagree with them. You could definitely place it wrong if you're not careful.
Winning. Whoa, chill!
While you're playing Sandy, you have to keep in mind that he is a controller and a support brawler rolled into one, which means you should use his super for 2 different purposes, either to provide support or for area control. As I mentioned before, both of Sandy's star powers provide some sort of support to your teammates. Whether you want to go with healing or visibility on grassy maps, you have to keep that aspect of your super in mind. Because of the limitations of your basic attack, you shouldn't be charging in headfirst anyway, which means you need to hang back, stay alert, and observant. Try to only use your super when the healing or visibility will directly benefit your teammates, not just benefit you. Sandy is a controller, which means you want to use his sandstorms for area control as well. When you use his super for control, don't just think about getting takedowns. His super lasts for 9 seconds, so try to get the most out of that 9 seconds as possible. Take down your targets, but also use the invisibility to reposition yourself and keep your enemies guessing. The The best way to do that is to make sure your sandstorm is connecting multiple patches of grass so that you and your teammates can surprise attack your enemies once they get a false sense of security and try to push up the map. You also want to use his control sandstorms to force enemies to retreat into a part of the map that puts them at a disadvantage, which most often than not is their spawn. Even if you're not using root sands, most players will still leave the sandstorm area and just try to wait it out. So positioning your super so they have nowhere to retreat but into their spawn will help your team push up and complete most objectives much easier, especially in Brawl Ball, Hot Zone, and Gem Grab.
To sleep, perchance to dream.
Right now, Sandy is a pretty safe bet in both ranked and playing ladder. I would like to note though that because of his low DPS and support mechanics, he performs best when you're playing with good teammates. While I was playing with randoms, it was very hit or miss. The problem with providing support and area control to randoms is they don't tend to use it very wisely. You can do everything right, provide support, and give them every advantage, but randoms will always random. But on the other hand, if you play with a friend who you can rely on or coordinate with a team, Sandy is absolutely unstoppable right now. While I was playing Infinite Doom with randoms, I struggled to get a win. Not because I wasn't getting star players or kills, but my randoms, more often than not, were just so bad at taking advantage of the support I was providing them. So when Jotaro Kujo, one of my favorite friends to play with because he's so skilled and reliable, asked to join, I thought, the Brawl Stars god have finally decided to be kind to me. He picked a support brawler, Ruffs, to help me shine, and because I knew he'd do his job and not commit suicide over and over like randoms always do, I was able to relax and unleash my true Sandy powers on this mode. In fact, throughout the making of this video, I had a bunch of friends help me out while my Brawlentine Eddie was sick and couldn't help. Feel better, Eddie. Every time I teamed up, everything went so much more smoothly, and it was pretty obvious how good Sandy's Hypercharge is when you have good teammates who know how to take advantage of it. But playing with randoms also gave me a few new insights into who Sandy counters and how to counter him if you're drafting in ranked. So let's get into it.
So cool, yeah. Yay, woohoo!
He counters brawlers who want to be able to see where they're going, so like everyone. There's so little most brawlers can do once he uses his super, because he doesn't just make himself invisible, he makes his entire team invisible, which is such a crazy advantage to have over the enemy team. Not to mention, his sandstorm covers an enormous area, so once you activate his super and you and your teammates disappear, your enemies will struggle because they can't be sure where you are, which causes them to either abandon ship and wait it out or become easy targets for Sandy and his teammates in the sandstorm. More specifically though, since his basic pierces through enemies and objects, he also counters brawlers who rely on meat shields to push up the map like Charlie. She does outrange him though, and her cocoon can shut down pretty much everyone, but if you're looking for an S tier brawler to counter Charlie's spiders, Sandy is a good pick. He also counters, as I mentioned before, grass campers whenever you're using his Rude Sam star power. Since the star power inflicts some damage, it provides a lot of visibility for your teammates, and grass campers will be forced to leave the grass in most cases, becoming easy targets for you and your teammates. This is why I think of Sandy as not just one of the best controllers in the game, but also one of the best supporters in the game, because while his sandstorm provides much needed control, it can also be used to provide support for his teammates. he's countered primarily by brawlers who outrange him. He can't work his sand magic if he can't hit his shots. Even though he has a quick movement speed, it can be very difficult to close the gap while facing brawlers who outrange him, and if he can't charge his super, he can control large areas or provide support to his teammates, who could benefit a lot from his sandstorm. So the higher up in trophies you get, and especially once you get to legendary and ranked, players will know not to feed you, and so you'll have to work harder to get your first super. While Sandy can handle pets with low HP like Charlie's or Tara's, his low DPS and slow reload means he struggles every time he encounters anything with HP like Lori or Nita's bear, especially if Nita is hypercharged. While he can still pierce through the bear and hit Nita, as long as she stands back and lets Bruce keep Sandy busy, yeah, there's nothing you can do. While Sandy counters grass campers, the same brawlers that provide the same visibility as he does can also do the same to him. Most notably, Ems and Janet. Ems' super and Janet's drop the base gadget have about the same radius as Sandy's sandstorm, and while Janet's gadget might not last long due to Sandy's root sand star power, it will last long enough for her and her teammates to find their targets in Sandy's sandstorm. Plus, both Janet and Ems outrange Sandy and thrive really well on the same grassy maps as he does.
Guess I'll have to do stuff. To sleep, perchance to dream. Whatever. I'll have to do stuff.
Sandstorm!
Also, a counterintuitive counter is extremely aggro brawlers like assassins and tanks. While they will definitely feed his super in the process, the low DPS of his basic attack makes it very hard for him to fend them off. His gadget helps, but sometimes extremely aggressive brawlers will still find a way to get to him once the stun ends. But this is also why I prefer using his +1 gear, because especially playing ladder, there will always be an aggressive brawler to deal with, and your teammates won't always help you out. Sandy's biggest weakness is his basic attack, so his lack of DPS and range, which means if you come up with a comp that helps him deal with aggression and range, your team will be pretty unstoppable. So if you or your teammate wants to play Sandy in ranked or in ladder, make sure you pair him with brawlers who can make up for what he lacks. Once he gets his first super, he can cycle supers pretty easily, which means Sandy can make any strong brawler absolutely deadly. But it's important to remember that while he provides such good area control and support for his team, he can't do that well if he's being bullied by Nita bears or being tormented by aggressive brawlers who steamroll right over him. Sandy is an amazing team player, but he needs good teammates who have his back in order to do his thing well. So if you're playing Sandy, try to make sure you have a teammate or two who will do just that. And if your friend is playing Sandy, make sure you're the kind of teammate that will make his dreams a reality.
Guess I'll have to do stuff. Nap time!
All in all, even with his Hypercharge, Sandy is a fun brawler to play in most modes. So, if you ask me, he's definitely worth unlocking and upgrading. Also, a big thank you to Jotaro Kujo, Jose, Lemon, Cekic, I hope I'm saying that right, Frozenskys, Chewie, IDarkLex and Yonro, as well as everyone who didn't make it into this video but were still so helpful, like Rvbeny and Broccoli. You guys are the best and you truly made this video even better with your help. If you liked this video and want me to make a video for a specific brawler, definitely leave a comment and let me know. I'm making a series, so I'm adding all of your suggestions to my list. I promise I'm going to do my best to make a guide for all of them. But until then, play later, guys. Mwah!